Good morning and welcome to the Ask Weldon Show, episode 173. Today we're going to talk about Max Deutsch, the obsessive learner, perfectionism, and a Western training culture. Somebody asked about what it would look like to adopt a training culture that was different from Korea in order to try to surpass them in esport. Welcome to the show. This is the Ask Weldon Show. My name is Weldon, and I'm a sports psychology trainer working in esport, mostly professional esport. I do work with some amateurs, and especially did many years ago when I was kicking it off. On this show, people ask me about pretty much everything related to peak performance and esport, peak performance in life, how to use video games to serve your own personal growth and desires to grow like as a person, tackling things like perfectionism, for example, and even now, as of yesterday, relationship advice. Or actually, this would be 2 days ago, but relationship advice, which fits right into my groove since my wife and I have been planning to start a marriage podcast where we talk about how to have a good marriage, how to be good parents, and how to be good Catholics. Maybe not the last one. I'm not a great Catholic, but I'm working on it. So feel free to throw in your own relationship advice questions here. I will not be answering them very well because I'm about 50% of the equation, right? I always like to bounce everything off of Crystal and find out, if I'm correct or incorrect. But at the very least, I can tell you what I would have done, which apparently works fine most of the time, since our marriage is decent. Not perfect. Decent. Decent, I think, means you can recover from all the mistakes. Not that you're making mistakes. Not that you're not making mistakes, FYI. But regardless of that, why don't we jump into the show? This is the show where you call in audio questions. That is my preferred method. You can use the tool anchor.fm, anchor.fm/Weldon Green. That's where you should go right now to call in your question. You click the little plus message button on my profile, and it gives you a chance to record an audio message. I just play it on my show. We're going to hear 3 of them right now. And I'm out of questions, so please go right now and answer it, and then come back and unpause this video and hit the like button while you're on the way out. All right. First question is about this guy named Max Deutsch. I'm going to put a little frame of reference. Actually, I'll let the guy do it, and then I'll explain what he misses. Ready? Go.
Hi, Weldon. I was just listening to your podcast and recently got into it. There's a story about a 24-year-old who spends 1 month training a new skill every month. Some of the skills are how to solve a Rubik's Cube in 17 seconds or how to play the guitar. And he spends 30 days being what he calls an obsessive learner. Is this true, or is this like a hack just to create new skills, but not really habits that you can apply to later in life? Like, what are your thoughts on him and his training techniques? I'll send a link in the message to a Wall Street Journal talking about this. Thank you.
All right. So thank you for the question. The guy's name is Max Deutsch, and he basically is a 24-year-old who kind of got bored with being a product manager and decided he was going to take a year off and learn a new skill every month. And he was going to approach it, machine learning, algorithmically, kind of tackling stuff with a learning mindset. Reminds me a lot of The Art of Learning. The Art of Learning by by Josh Waitzkin. I think maybe the difference between the two is that so let's dig into this, right? There's a couple differences between what Max Deutsch is doing and The Art of Learning. For the principle's the same. Learning is interesting, learning is fun, learning is something you should tackle with a plan, with a system, and something you should do obsessively. The big difference between Josh Waitzkin and Max Deutsch, and no like shade to Max Deutsch here, right? But the big difference is that he's taking only the fun part of learning. He's taking that first 24 hours, the first 20 days, the first 30 days, the first moment when you have a lot of victories in your learning process. When you're tackling something new, all of you are familiar with this, it feels a lot of fun. There's limitless possibility in front of you. You think like, ooh, how far can I get in just this amount of time? How far can I take this thing? You haven't been assessed yet, for example, and you get to think about like thinking outside the box, like, ooh, like how can I do this differently than other people have before? And you learn all these new things about these new knowledgeable things about a skill, these new systemic things. You see beauty in what's possible from people who've mastered it before. You get to study the greats. You get to envision yourself like them. You get to try to pick apart their process and try to put it together. And you get to do all this really fun stuff with very few hurdles and very little assessment and very little suffering, I would say. And it's very uplifting. It's fun to do. And then you end up with like, slightly better or slightly worse than somebody who is doing the same exact thing would do if they were at the end of the month doing exactly that thing. So I looked at his supposed feats, and they were all things that, you should be expected to do if you're basically tackling those things obsessively for a month, trying to do what he's doing. So I think it's great. And I think it's cool that he's bringing awareness to tackling new skills and doing that stuff. The difference between him and Josh Waitzkin is that Josh Waitzkin picked something and then he did only that thing obsessively, but not just to the point of kind of like first self-assessment, but to the point of complete failure at every level for years and years and years until he mastered it. So the pursuit of mastery and the pursuit of learning the basics are two very, very different things and mindsets. And I don't think you can really compare the two people because Josh Waitzkin became world-class in three different crafts, actually. He became one of the best chess players in the world. Then he became a world champion in Tai Chi. And then he became a world contender in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So like 18th, I think, is the highest he ever ranked. I'm not really sure, but I would have to check on that. So the refinement of the painful part of the learning process is I think the more, I would say, noble and like eternal feat that humans need to tackle. And what Max is doing is essentially looking at the algorithmic side and the curve jumping side. And I think that people should do that. I think curve jumping is important. I like to use curve jumping all the time to learn old skills in a new way and skip all of the tedium that people apply to, deliberate practice systems. Like the deliberate practice system of learning a language, I think is really stupid. I like to curve jump it. And you can do a lot of that through memorization, in fact. And yeah, I think that those are really fun things to tackle, but it's not really something special until you master something, until you hit peak performance in something that you are better at than anybody else in the world, or approaching the top of human performance at, or you don't have to get to that stage, but you have to reach a level of mastery through which you have gone through assessment and pain and, I don't want to say torture, but like suffering in order to lift yourself up out of it in kind of a mental way, which comes through iterations upon iterations of like putting it down and picking it up again and putting it down and picking it up again and being diligent and keeping with it. I think that is a beautiful thing about people who have mastered a skill, is that you know that they've put in the time and the discipline necessary to kind of like pull it off. So I don't see anything personally, myself, just speaking for me, I don't see anything very interesting in this guy's story, because I don't see anything noble in terms of like the feat that he's undertaking. But I think it's a cool story, and it's very interesting. Thanks for bringing it up to me. All right, question number 2, perfectionism. And this one is a two-parter, so I'm going to play the first part and the second part. And I think that a lot of you will resonate with this guy's explanation of his emotions. Why isn't it playing? Let's try this again.
Hey Weldon, this is Chambers, or L Tigers in game, and my question was about like both being in the game and in life. I've adapted the persona of being a perfectionist, or the philosophy, not because like I have to have everything right, but it's because I'm afraid of doing something wrong. So like I've learned in games and in life, I've done things to avoid losing. Like I'm not doing an assignment just because I want to do the best. I'm doing it because I don't want to be like the worst at it or be made a fool being the worst. So how can I like transition from that and being able to like learn things? Because I have a struggle with learning things that I have no idea. If I don't know it, I shut down immediately because I'm afraid that through trying to work through it, I'm gonna fail in some sort. Like with things I'm good at, I can do them for hours. Like if it's a math problem I know how to do, I'll do it for hours. But if I come across something get stuck, that's it. I'm done. There's no like working through that. And thus,
All right, part 2.
And so, what would be like kind of the way I would start? Because I've done your Mac program and it's helped me out a lot. But a lot of non-perfectionism is based in how I appear to others. And so, what is kind of like the transition or the mindset or steps that I need to take to start to be able to do things I'm not comfortable with and be okay with that and just learn to grow from that? Because, yep, that's it. Thanks.
All right. A really well put question, because you gave me a lot of fuel to work with and a lot of different insights to kind of tease out of this. And thank you so much for calling in, for supplying it. So let me restate it first. Perfectionism done, basically Chambers here is saying, I'm doing perfectionism wrong instead of perfectionism right. Perfectionism done incorrectly and is like, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Cuts the wrong way. And so how can I change that approach to perfectionism, or how can I delete this and adopt one that is healthier? And the answer is really challenging, but it has to do with vulnerability, social support, and social identity, flow state, judgment, non-judgment. And I wanted to start from the most positive kind of like aspect of your question, which was when you talked about when I'm doing something I'm good at, like math, I can do it for hours and just be like in the zone. You didn't say in the zone, but it sounded like you were talking about that when you said that you have no compunction with just tackling it, and you feel competent at it, and even if you make mistakes, you're just working through them, I assume. So we want this kind of amazing flow state where you see a challenge and you feel that you are up to the challenge, even if it's hard, and you tackle it, and you might fail, but then you succeed. That's the kind of the mindset that is missing from the other aspects or the other things that you were tackling, where your competence, not confidence, but competence level, and is your assessment of your own competence, thinks that you might not be up to the challenge, and therefore it will make you lose face in front of other people, right? So you do the math thing non-judgmentally. And judgment and non-judgment is the biggest trigger difference between being in flow state versus being in panic state, this perfectionism thing that you're talking about. And why don't we just get rid of the word perfectionism, okay? Why don't you label perfectionism the thing that you want to eventually have, and label it like good perfectionism, and that is like the pursuit of perfection for the sake of perfection, knowing that you'll never get there, with the idea that you will like forgive yourself and tackle things along the way in the process. And why don't we label the thing that you're doing right now not necessarily like perfectionism, even though it is kind of like perfectionism, right, in a bad way? Why don't we label it something else, like avoiding judgment or saving face? Because that will help you understand the separation between the two things you're trying to tackle. If we just label it with exactly the things that you're struggling with. So judgment versus non-judgment. You can always, of course, adopt a non-judgmental mindset. You need to adopt a non-judgmental mindset towards yourself in order to kind of like tackle flow state. That's one of the aspects of it. Present state focus. Present, not the future or the past, non-judgmental, and kind of like a calm. I guess like a calm or like a challenge, like a face the challenge equanimously, not with panic. What's the next way I want to tackle this? Okay, let's tackle it in terms of where you're going. So ideally, you want to be in a situation where you are not afraid of saving face because your identity is not tied up into the thing that you are doing. So you do something and it fails and it looks bad in front of other people and you feel judgment and you feel less of a person because you're identifying yourself as like a failure in that way. You want to be really secure in your identity and self-ego and be like, it doesn't matter that I failed in that because I don't care what other people think because I am this person who does this thing, and so it's irrelevant to me that I'm good or bad at that. That is a very hard place to get to, but it definitely helps to be in a place like that. And even when you're there, you're going to encounter, so like for myself, I think that I'm pretty solid and happy in my self-identity. I have a very secure identity as a partner to my spouse. I have a pretty secure identity as a father. I'm not very good at it, but I'm working at it. I have a pretty secure identity as like a sports psychology trainer, and a language learner. But then when I go into situations where my language learning is challenged, like it's really uncomfortable for me and I judge myself a lot still. But it helps to have these bases to fall back on when you're doing things like video games, for example, where you can be like, well, at least outside of the video game, I am this, so I don't have to worry so bad about being bad at this thing. You see how that kind of like helps as a crutch to lean on? So this comes from social support, essentially. Understanding the 3 pillars of social support as one of them being cheerleaders, people who love you for who you are or for things that are different from your performance aspect. If we're going to go along the way of you playing Overwatch or League of Legends, you need people who like you because you're you, not because of how you do in League of Legends or Overwatch or whatever, or whatever task it is. Or even people who don't like you because of you're good at math, right? Because then you think, oh, well, they wouldn't like me if I wasn't good at math, or so they clearly won't like me if I'm not good at this other thing, right? It's just dependent on personality traits about you and the relationship that you have with them. And you can lean on those relationships for your identity. You can explore within those relationships who you are as a person, independent of the skills you happen to possess. Who are you as a person, Chambers, independent of the skills you happen to possess? Are you a compassionate person? Are you a emotionally intelligent person? Okay, this is, again, we're back to the skills, but these are more relational skills, so they hit more on your identity. Are you an ambitious person? Like, what do you want, right? Okay, so once you are working on that identity, good. Keep working on it for the next 10 years. Great. Okay, next part of the equation, vulnerability. So this is the last thing I want to talk about. Vulnerability is the ability to lean into the painful part of these processes and feel vulnerable and feel guilt and not shame. Guilt and not shame. You go in, you fail at something, you feel shame, which is not, I am bad at this thing, but I am bad. And this thing exposed it to other people. So actually, you could think of it this way too. I did badly at this task versus I am bad at this. So it's like a different, it's a different verb. I am versus I did. And I want you to move towards guilt. I want you to move less in the shame direction by defining yourself by the things that you can and can't do, and more in the direction of guilt, which is like very productive emotion, because you can feel guilty about doing something badly, but not feel ashamed about doing something badly. And then that guilt can power you to try it again. Like, for example, maybe with a math question, you screw up a math question, oh, shoot, that mistake. I shouldn't have made that mistake. I know better. That's guilt. Oh, shoot, I made the mistake. Oh, dang it. I don't have a perfect anymore. That's shame. So you want to find places where you have this shame and you want to try to convert it into guilt through mental exercises, whatever it is that you can do. There's tons of different tactics, self-talk, just like thinking it through, just telling yourself these things. And you want to be able to lean into that stress and rely on yourself to be guilty about it and not shameful about it. And if you can eliminate the shame from your, I don't want to say from your self-talk and from your mind, because it's always going to show up, right? But if you can eliminate it from your recursive thinking, where you dwell on it and you say it again and again and again, and you build it up into something more than it is, then you can do this. You can do kind of better perfectionism. And so I'm glad that you say you've been doing the MAC program, because stopping those thoughts of shame and just being and saying like no, and redefining them or re-putting them as guilt. And I do this a lot, right? I stop my thoughts and I say, no, I might not be good at this today, but that doesn't mean I won't be good someday. I have these mantras that I use for myself, or like, be so good they can't ignore you. Just like keep improving at it. Don't worry about the losing face now and people saying bad things about you now. Just be so good eventually that they can't ignore how good you are, and just keep plugging away at it, right? I use these mantras to change my shame into guilt and turn my inaction and freezing in the headlights into action forward. So you can do the same exact thing. And the MAC program, of course, is the fundamental of that movement forward and leaning into that pressure. But I hope that I gave you the linguistic tools to define what you're going through and how you should tackle it mentally when you're thinking through these processes. Remember, you enter this non-judgmental phase when you're doing things like math, and you're entering into this very self-judgmental phase when you're doing other things that you're bad at. So you need to get non-judgmental about it. Don't judge yourself. It's really hard to do, but of course you can strive for it. And then you gotta understand the shame guilt switch. Be vulnerable, and the way that you can be vulnerable is that you build up your identity independent of what you do, and instead you build up your identity of who you are, which you can do through journaling, conversations, relationships, reflection, aging. Aging helps, just living life and figuring out who you are through the things that happen, stuff like that. And pay attention a lot to the flow state that you have when you're in math and the or other things that you're good at, and try to take attributes from those states and bring them over to other things you're tackling. Like take the best habits and ways of thinking and approaches that you do when you're tackling any task that you're good at, and try to just drag them over to stuff that you suck at. And don't put a burden on yourself like you have to get good at this thing now, but just use the same processes to tackle it, even if you don't plan to get good at it, and even if you plan to do it just one day and be done with it. And then, like, most people are avoiding emotion, right? They're saying like, okay, well, I'm never going to be good at Overwatch, so I'm just going to play it bleh, and just not care about it. No, you can care about it. You can care about improving for the day that you're playing in the week. But you just have to set realistic expectations. Like, you're not going to be some like super high ranked player if you're only playing one day a week. You just have to tackle your own self-improvement and your own self-learning within that like 6 hours you're playing in an entire week, and realize you're never going to be some god and your limitations, and forgive yourself for that, and just do it and tackle mastery for fun in the small little step that you're going to take in that 6 hours, and not have these grand expectations of yourself that you want to look like a certain thing. You have to let go of the dream of looking like a really good player in front of your friends, essentially, or in front of the internet, who are definitely not your friends. Okay, long enough answer to that incredibly long and well-explained question. Appreciate it. And for those of you who are interested in the MAC program, the thing that he's talking about is my Mindfulness Acceptance Commitment Training Program, which is an online video training course, which I'm turning into an app actually right now. And every single thing that you purchase, every single MAC program that you purchase currently is going right towards development. This is mindgames.gg/MAC is the URL. And you can use the code AskWeldon to get a $5 discount. And when you purchase it, you get lifetime access. So right now, for the last 3 years that I've been doing this program, it's 50 online videos, by the way. For the last 3 years I've been doing this program, everything has been pay one price, get it forever. That's going to change in the future. Obviously, everybody who purchases it now is going to be grandfathered in, right? But then going forward from that point, it's not going to be the case that you can get it forever. So if you are interested in following this for a long time and just having possession of it, now is a good time to get in, because it supports the development of the new program and the new app, and you get to use it also. Or, yeah, you can wait and not worry about it. And then buy it when you realize everybody else is using it and they're all beating you on the competitive ladder. And you're like, oh, why didn't I buy it back then? Now I have to pay the subscription fee. 100% guarantee, by the way. You can ask for a refund anytime you want. That's what 100% guarantee means. This little pop-up in the corner, it just says, 7 months from now, if you're like, meh, you can just say, hey, I'd like my money back. And poof, there it is. All right, guys. Final question.
Hello, Weldon. Do you think we need to develop a new way to train all the esport athletes so we can finally overcome all the Korea powerhouse? I was thinking that the same way their training method is enhanced by their culture, we would need to create our own training method enhanced by our own culture instead of just copying the gaming house and high pressure environment that they usually do. Thanks a lot.
So Daniel brought up a really good point with this question, which is that Korea, despite having a much more well-funded scene early on, stuck with the gaming house style training facility and just added scouting camps, or training camps to them. So they would have farm teams, essentially, where they would farm up players and create these very high-pressure environments where they would, and as you know, they're more willing to swap out players and lose games in response to personal things and in order to create pressure on the players. So that's something I'd never considered. Like, why didn't Korea move towards? Actually, I consider this a lot. Why didn't Korea move towards something more kind of like advanced in terms of their training system than just a gaming house? But tradition. It's because tradition. They're very big into tradition. Do what works, right? Innovation is not necessarily an amazing thing when you're leaving behind something that is already effective. And I tend to agree with that. So, but as far as does the West have its own training culture, or are we just sticking with gaming houses, which is this Korean thing? First of all, I don't think gaming houses are a Korean thing. I think you can check out my video on gaming houses a few weeks ago to see that they developed out of very specific needs, and they still serve very specific needs in the esport community. But I think that there is a Western training culture in Europe. Certainly, we can see. I would say it's work hard, play hard. In Europe, for sure, and a little bit in the fighting scene in North America and the fighting game community, as well as in the Call of Duty community. I think work hard, play hard is definitely the mantra there, and I think that it has paid off. Right, these are communities where the U.S. and Europe dominate in CS:GO. In League of Legends, they do pretty darn well globally. In Call of Duty, which is pretty much a North American kind of sport, but in the fighting game community as well, people kind of live by that mantra, and do these massive training boot camps and then go crazy, are doing really well right now. And I think that is mostly because the scene hasn't matured to push those people out, unfortunately. So they might not succeed in the future when there's enough competitiveness to kind of drive people towards all-in perfectionism. Calling back to my second question here, but I think right now it works, and I like that approach because it makes esport fun for the time that it is right now. As you can see, League of Legends North America and Overwatch League in North America are both pushing toward this like perfectionistic training system mantra, which I believe is the North American model of sport, and the idea that you abstract everything in the game. I think that you can see this from startups such as Shadow.gg, which is turning everything into analytics, from the way that people like Team Liquid are setting up training facilities, the way that they want to measure everything biometrically. So I was doing biofeedback tracking with TSM because this is my culture as well, and or my background as well. And now there's biofeedback solutions that are being developed for esport teams. I think most notably with Shadow.gg. Implementing their first iterations of that, and I think that that's going to be the way that the West kind of tackles esport, is through, or at least North America, through this very like break it down analytics. The way the NBA kind of uses this videography kind of stuff, and they try to create training systems for everything. It's going to be all about pushing the envelope of training systems and the newest training system and drills and analytics software and optimization and nutrition and fitness and all of it, kind of everything, optimize. I think the best way to put this is the movie Kung Fu Football. If you've ever watched Kung Fu Football, it's like the good guys are these random Kung Fu street toughs who just kind of like practice playing football a lot. using their traditional methods. And then the bad guys are this North American team or maybe Western team, whatever, and they like have this super science approach, and then they inject themselves with these chemicals, and they're super strong, right? And I like to think that that's basically a summation of how it is that the West approaches sport versus how the East approaches sport in a from a cultural lens. I certainly have seen that in every kind of like aspect of how I've studied sport in the West versus how I participated in sport when I was in the East. I think it's very true at the cultural lens level, not at the like practical, everyday, every single situation kind of, reality level. But yeah, that's the answer to my question, to your question. That's my answer to your question. And I think that we're going to see, I predict that this scientific approach, this breakdown analytic kind of pursuit of perfection through trying new things, tearing down the house and rebuilding it over and over again, is going to succeed because it always has. If you look at the nations that currently are at the top of competitive sport globally, it's historically been Russia and the United States. Since the Olympics kind of initiated, there are other countries that climb up on the individual little sports, like with small competitive bases, such as Finland, and Canada gets in there with the winter sports, although they have a large population. But with smaller populations, there are countries that can challenge certain other larger countries. But I think that what's interesting to see is the way China is tackling sport, because they're also really climbing up there in the medals in terms of the Olympics and also being competitive globally in a lot of different sports. But they also, I think, don't necessarily have non-traditional training methods. Like, I think everything they do, at least from the two sports that I've looked at the Chinese training methods in, which is Olympic weightlifting and swimming, they do things in a very Chinese way. They say, like, our way. I don't want to say Chinese way, but I just want to say they don't steal a bunch of stuff necessarily from the outside and just do it blindly. They just have their version, and they might integrate stuff, but they have their own fundamental beliefs about how sport should be trained. And they don't immediately sway off of those when they see somebody who's better than them and just copying their training method. So I think that's pretty cool, and maybe that'll be a challenge to my idea that a scientific analytic tear everything down and rebuild it a million times and eke out the weakness and optimize the strengths is not necessarily always going to hold sway as far as who the best in the world are, which would be awesome. Okay, guys, that's the show for today. Make sure to come over to Twitch, where I cast this live, twitch.tv/mindgamesweldon, and where I am going right now to the post-game show. Ciao. Bye, YouTube.